everybody. Hi, Dr. Alandra Byrd, Washington. Say
Hi.
all names.
Oh, yeah.
How are you?
I'm doing well, and yourself?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you tonight for all kinds of reasons that we'll talk about along the way. But first and foremost, want to welcome everybody who's joining us tonight and encourage you to put your questions or comments in the chat as we move through the conversation. And I am going to read a brief bio to get us started for those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Washington's esteemed career and accomplishments. Dr. Alandra Washington has over 25 years of experience leading both local and national initiatives to improve equitable outcomes for children, families, and communities. She currently serves as Vice President of Transformation and Organizational Effectiveness at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, where she is responsible for overall functions of enterprise-wide transformation, redesign, and change management, and efficient operations to maximize overall organizational performance excellence. She joined Kellogg in 2002 as a program director on the Philanthropy and Volunteerism team, where she was responsible for the design and execution of national initiatives which foster the adoption of racial equity grant-making frameworks and strengthening identity-based philanthropic networks and donor engagement. In addition, she served as director of programs responsible for leading programmatic strategy development and execution across early childhood and K-3 systems, employment equity, and entrepreneurship. Prior to joining W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Dr. Washington was CEO of the Greater East St. Louis Community Fund, where she provided leadership towards the organization's mission to move residents up and out of poverty through equitable community development strategies. She also served as executive director of New Spirit Neighborhood Organizing Office, also in East St. Louis. She has also served over the course of her career on many philanthropic boards, including the Women's Funding Network, Association of Black Foundation Executives, also known as ABFE, Living Cities, Generation On, Aspen Institute's Ascend Program Advisory Board, and Asset Funders Network Steering Committee. She currently serves on Monitor Institute's What's Next in Philanthropy Advisory Team, and she is chair of the board of the Schott Foundation for Public Education. Dr. Washington earned a bachelor's degree of science in business administration and a master's in public administration, both from Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, and a doctorate in education from Western Michigan University. And now I'm done with your bio.
Sounds like I've been real busy and doing too much.
You've been real busy. So 20 years in philanthropy.
Well, actually 25 years in philanthropy.
If we count the Greater East St. Louis Community Foundation.
And 20 at the foundation.
And so you described in a conversation that I re-listened to, because you were here when Voice Vision Value launched in August of 2020, you along with the president and CEO of Kellogg Foundation at the time, your board chair, and then another VP, you and Lejeune and Carla and Celeste were all together in a conversation facilitated by Susan Taylor Batten of ABFE about the leadership legacy of Black women at Kellogg. And in talking about your career and transition to Kellogg, you described what it was like transitioning to big philanthropy, right? Kellogg being one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the US. And so you came from community philanthropy and then moved to big national philanthropy. And so what was that like? And then we'll talk about community philanthropy. I'm just curious, 25 years later, making that transition.
Yeah, I hear you. Thanks, Toya. First, before we just dive into that, I want to just say thank you for the invitation and being able to have the conversation today in celebration of Black Philanthropy Month and sort of closing out this month with the conversation. And I just want to reflect a little bit on just the journey of this work. And I remember a couple of years back, sitting in Panera when we were both home
Oh.
over the holiday for the Christmas break. And you were sharing with me this amazing vision that you had for this work and lifting up Black women leadership, lifting up our voice, our experiences, our learning, and being able to curate that and share that across the field for others to galvanize around this work. So I just want to say kudos to you and just all that you're doing in this space to lift up the power and voice of Black women in our leadership.
Thank you. I forgot about that breakfast in Panera. One of my favorite places. So, all right. Well, you're right.
Yeah. So, you know, it has been 20 years at the Kellogg Foundation. And the one thing that I reflect on in thinking about that transition and moving from local community-based philanthropy to larger, really international, right? Philanthropic organization just doing great things across the world. The one thing for me that helped in that transition was really around values alignment. Mm-hmm. And so the values of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, we believe that everyone has the inherent capacity to solve problems in their community. We believe that people have the inherent knowledge to be able to do that, the experience, the skill set, the wisdom. And so that aligned with everything that I did coming from community philanthropy in lifting up the power and the voice and the engagement of people in community and supporting them to solve their own problems. So, you know, that trend, the values alignment made it a lot easier in relationship to going to this larger foundation and being able to find my place and find my voice and find a spot for me to really carve out an opportunity to do great work. And I will say that, I mean, I know we'll talk a little bit more about it, but just the support system that existed in the foundation, especially for a young Black woman. I don't even think I was probably right at 30 or a little bit, 31 or something like that, but coming into that space and just all of the support systems that surrounded me in that space to be able to help me and guide me and navigate through some of those challenges. So I know we'll talk more about that, but that transition was a great transition. It was a great learning opportunity, and I'm still learning today.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that sort of acknowledgement of the answers really sitting in community, right? The solutions and the answers and the talent, the leadership, and the resourcing of folks in a way that really supports the ability for all of that promise to come to life. Yeah. And as you were talking about that values alignment, I was even thinking, about the work way back, even before the Community Foundation at New Spirit Neighborhood Organizing Office, right? So those organizing principles, sort of translating from one organization to the next, and you being in a position to even marshal and mobilize even more resources to community as you move through your career. And, this next question about leading through crisis, and I hadn't thought about it in this context until right now, honestly. I was thinking about crisis when I asked this question, right, for women having lived through and continuing to move through, COVID, the recession, inflation, the loss of so many, folk in community as a result of the traumas and tragedies that have been ongoing since we welcomed this new century. But again, thinking about us coming up and the days of New Spirit, right, and the various environmental crises that we faced, from flooding to infrastructure issues, access to clean water, and much thoughts, prayers, and sort of power to our brothers and sisters in the state of Mississippi right now.
Definitely.
But you have, right, sort of a well-established toolbox, if you will, around sort of a framework for leading and moving as a leader through crisis. So can you talk about that experience 25 plus years ago as an organizer up to now?
Sure. And that's a long sort of road to toe there. So we'll see what we can summarize that. But, I wanted to go back to something that you talked about in relationship to me coming into the Kellogg Foundation with that knowledge base, that skill set, community organizing, trained community organizer, right? And all of those practices and principles, being able to bring that into the Kellogg Foundation. But it was interesting in my hire, and I can just remember the focus on that particular skill set. And I think at the time, the foundation had had a different kind of operating model around its program officers and its skills and competencies and capabilities that was really rooted a little bit more in academia, right? So you had a lot of folks, and I always call myself a academic practitioner in relationship to that, because I also had the education chops, but my work was deeply rooted in community. And that was one of the skill sets and the capabilities that the foundation talked about as they thought about their next path forward as an organization. What does it mean around what was starting to burgeon as this racial equity framework? It wasn't quite articulated like that as of yet, but all of that skill set was accepted and embraced and expected to show up in my work at the foundation. So, even thinking back 20 years ago around leading through crisis, and we know for any of us who have worked deeply in community and led nonprofit organizations in communities of color that are under-resourced and marginalized, that almost every day there is some type of crisis to lead through. And we even see it playing out now. You talked about our brothers and sisters in Mississippi that our thoughts and prayers are with, but it's something always there, or always at the tipping point of being a crisis. Somebody said, yes, Lord, I know that's right, Tina Green. And so, all of that work that you did, that I did in East St. Louis, really helped for me to understand the importance of relationships, to understand the importance of working with those and helping to support and give voice to those who sometimes can feel voiceless. And so leading in a crisis for me really means, how do you get down to that root cause and start to roll up your sleeves with community and with folks to be able to do the work that needs to be done to manage and navigate through that crisis. And so that's one part. And then I think it's the whole sustainability piece around this, and how do you as a leader step up to work with folks to think about real change and sustainable change for the future. And so all of that experience I was able to bring into the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and use some of those organizing principles in the work that I've been so blessed to do there. It was interesting when I came to the foundation, they used to have, and Lejeune does it now with what she calls Keurig chats, but leaders used to have what was, I think they called it like leadership slice conversations or something like that. And I had my first slice conversation, and I said, yeah, I'm going to put them to the test in my slice conversation. I'm going to see if the rhetoric is really reality here in the foundation. And so I knew one of the questions that they typically ask is, if you had resources to start something new or to do something different that the Kellogg Foundation might not be doing, what would it be? And I said, oh, I'm going to be ready for this answer because I've always thought about this and dreamed about this. And my answer was, I would like to start an initiative or a body of work with those who are incarcerated, to start to train and develop them around being philanthropists. This was 20 years ago. And they didn't blink an eye. It's like, oh, okay. And they said, that's an excellent idea. How can we help you do that? And that was one of my first sort of initiatives that I created within the organization that focused on incarcerated men in the Muskegon prison system, partnered with Grand Valley State University and initiated this 3-year program, training and developing them. They did re-granting, right, from that system, and just built out a strategy, did that work, and changed and transformed lives in that system. And so I bring that story up just to say, for me, going back again to thinking about values alignment and how important that is as we show up in these spaces and lead through crisis. And then, there were a few things I think in the immediate sort of last 2 to 3 years as we've been in this this great reckoning, I guess we call it now, around everything that has been happening in this country, where I had to kind of take a step back and really think about my leadership from a different level and a different perspective. And if I summed it up, for me, it was around, how do I get clear around my healing and radical self-care? How do I deepen my learning and innovation of thought and action? And how do I come to the table with another level of boldness in my work? And as I was, witnessing everything that was happening as a foundation, as we were pivoting and being agile around all of the things that were coming to us, I had to kind of just first step back and do some healing work for myself, because I knew that this was going to be a heavy lift. And I'd been going for a couple of years with key initiatives across the organization. And so I stepped back for just a minute to say, I need some healing work done. I need to think about some radical self-care in this space, because I don't want to burn myself out. So in that particular work, the Kellogg Foundation, part of our racial equity work is also racial healing. And so I really leaned into a lot of the tools and the work that was happening in the foundation. At that time, we were having some really great healing circle conversations around everything that we were experiencing and witnessing, not only as someone in philanthropy doing the work, but also being able to bring our personal stories to that space. And that was really helpful for me in just navigating through the crisis. The other piece for me was thinking about, what is it that I need to learn to do different in this space? Because we are just facing such unprecedented times right now. And so I kind of went on a learning journey to kind of figure out what that really means for me, and ended up actually doing some training and development work with Institute for the Future. And Institute for the Future is an organization that trains individuals on futures thinking methodology and practice. And so, that was happening at that time. And I was able to use a lot of that training and development to lead our organization, or co-lead our organization through our emergent strategy as we were dealing with everything that was happening with COVID and the inequity crisis and everything else that was going on. And I would just say, in that particular space came out of that some of the bold solutions and the bold innovations that totally shifted our organization and the way that we operate. So for example, we are totally now a hybrid organization. That wouldn't have been broken before the pandemic, right? We were doing some things, but we weren't totally there. A flexible work program that has benefited our staff and their families, and being able to take the time that's needed to be with family and friends. We overhauled all of our grant making practices and took out all of the stuff that we thought was necessary that really wasn't necessary, that sometimes caused blockers for our grantees and grant seekers. We just stripped that. So we are working our way through that particular piece. But for me, it was, how do we come up with some real innovative, bold solutions that will work for our staff as well as our external stakeholders, and where we could see some real tangible changes now. So, you know, for me, it was the healing, it was the learning, and then it was stepping up with those bold solutions and innovation.
And I think it's interesting in how for so many women who I've talked to, as we've navigated sort of the personal impacts, right, and inputs of these last few years in a way that I would say for me personally, right, was leaning into vulnerability, right, and leaning into just the realization of how fragile all of it is. And sort of navigating through that reality, because we're always conscious of the fragility and vulnerability with which we move through life, and particularly as women and as Black women. But these last couple years, 2.5 years, I think that sort of inward work is sort of moving out into the professional work, right? Sort of creating a whole different way of thinking about how the work gets done for us, for our teams. You know, it's a moment that continues to live and breathe and pulsate with a lot of impact into the model of what it looks like to show up in life, and work being part of life, but work is not your life, right?
That's right.
And so Cece, when I talked to Cece Gardner-Gleaser last week, and she spoke about this sort of phase of liberation that she's going through, but it's liberated her whole family, right? And the way in which it's liberated how she thinks about the work, how she thinks about what's possible. And I hear a lot of that coming through.
Yeah, my mouth was wide open because, you know, one of the kind of notes that I jotted down as I was reflecting on the questions about sort of my leadership for the moment, and what have I really learned about myself through all of this. And number one, I'll say that the Kellogg Foundation does an amazing job in leadership development from top to bottom. And so we work with leadership development with teams. We work with each individual leader on a very comprehensive leadership development plan with practices, methodologies, all of those particular pieces. But what I learned about myself in that journey was, and you got many of these messages because we had the same mama and grandmama and aunties and sisters, but you know, you have to show up as a Black woman on point, right? Ready to go. 10 times better than your counterpart, ready to just get the work done. And so, you know, that's how I showed up as a leader, definitely. And there is definitely credibility in that. But what I also learned in that space, and what, you know, feedback that was given to me by team members and others, is sometimes that can seem like an armor. I call it the Black girl armor, right? And it's perceived as I don't have any challenges or issues, that I can take on enormous bodies of work and workload and work with my team and galvanize them to get it done. that I am always polished and buttoned up, and I really don't have any kind of real concerns, because I'm just on top of it, which we know is so far from the truth, right? And that we're always, as leaders, we always have challenges and struggles. But the one thing for me was the vulnerability part. And how do I show up as a vulnerable leader? How do I show up raising my hand saying, yep, I need some help with this, and not having a concern that people will perceive me as being inept, that they would perceive me not understanding or knowing how to do the work, or that I couldn't even figure it out. So it was liberating for me, and hearing some of that just in my leadership journey through this space of showing up and being vulnerable. And I love the way Brene Brown puts it when she talks about leadership is not about being perfect. It really is about being courageous. And being courageous is stepping into leadership vulnerability. And so those are things that just through the years that I have been developing within myself. So people won't have this perception that, I got it all together when they don't know that I stayed up until 2:00 in the morning, to try to get something done, or they aren't understanding that I have a life, another whole life outside of WKKF that is also, and I know Tanisha in one of the talks talked about the many hats that Black women wear. I wear other hats as well. And how do I bring all of that to the picture so people will understand everything that I'm dealing with in that space? And I say that always with just a little bit of caution, because we talked about trust, and it's important to build strong containers of trust. And I know sometimes Black women will share their vulnerabilities. People will take that and weaponize it and try to use it against them. And so, just it's a delicate balance there, but definitely understanding who are those folks that are in my container of trust that I can turn to, ask for help, bounce things off of, ask them if they can actually do it sometimes, because I just don't have the capacity. So vulnerability for me is one thing that I've definitely been working on.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I turned 49 yesterday.
Happy belated birthday.
Thank you. I took a nap and I tested negative for COVID. Those were my birthday party favors. But I think, in listening to you and because y'all, we go way back, like church choir rehearsal, prayer meeting.
Yep.
Spending
the night, all of that.
All that, right? And so I think about, right, like that sort of armor, the hats, the mask, like many people describe it in a lot of different ways of how we feel we have to show up in order to keep ourselves safe, quite honestly, right? Mm-hmm. But then as I've gotten older, I've began to unpack those myths. Yeah. Began to understand the danger of, not fully allowing myself to know who I really am and to sort of step into the fullness of my identity and stand in that identity all the time, right? The sort of at the intersection of a professional, as a mom, as a sister, as a daughter, as a friend, as somebody's former wife, current partner, right? Like bringing all that I am to my full humanity, as opposed to I take off the mama hat when I go to work, or I take off the work hat when I go to mama. And, I take off the mama and the work hat when I go to engage my partner.
And you just even saying all of that sounds exhausting.
I was going to say, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting. Right. And so my coach years ago, when I first started working with Eva, she said, you've got to figure out how to be yourself all the time. And you can't compartmentalize yourself. Yeah. Because you will be tired and you won't even know why, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I think about growing up together and all the ways in which, you evolve as a woman to be who you are right now? And who are some of the people who helped you in that journey to sort of be in the full power of your own presence and identity and truth? Because you have to have examples, right?
Yes.
And I used to have a list of people I didn't want to grow up to be like, as opposed to the people I wanted to grow up to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear
And
you.
so, like, I don't want to be that chick. I don't want to be that dude.
Mhm.
So who are some of the people that, are part of that legacy of trust and sisterhood and support that's helped to get you to right now?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question because it just sort of takes me way back, right? It takes me back to community and people in our community, those neighborhood community organizers that were working in the trenches, and we were working in the trenches with them, and they were our elders, right? And so Sister Davis in Emerson Park neighborhood, and Sister Lorraine, right? All of those folks that really
Who
took
was the
us.
lady in Toastmasters, the very well,
Yeah.
put together? I see her face. I see Dr. Hudlin's face.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
but they were elders, right? And they were just taking us under their wings. They were coaching us. They were mentoring us. They saw things in us that we didn't see in ourselves, and they respected us. And I thought that, just thinking about the generational gap there that existed, because we're talking about elders. At that time, we were talking about people who were already in their 60s and 70s and 80s, still in the trenches doing this work. But they respected us, like they respected the freshness of our ideas and what we were trying to bring to the table. They encouraged us. They were risk takers with us. They didn't make us feel dumbed down, or, sometimes how you're younger, people can get in that space of saying, child, sit down. You don't know what you're doing. That was never how they worked with us and how they coached and mentored and developed us. And so all of those folks across those 20 neighborhoods in East St. Louis, and those leaders, what is Mr. Harrell, and just all of those leaders.
Subtle, right?
Yes, Mr. Suttles, all of those leaders that were like, yep, let's do that. I've never tried that, but let's go for it. Just such encouragement in that space. And then I would say, even as I moved into the work of philanthropy, running our local community foundation, at that time, a little bit before that time, Tulia Hamilton was running the St. Louis Community Foundation. And even as I was, sort of developing in that nonprofit space, she was just a great coach and a great mentor in that space, and took me under her wings and taught me so much about how to find my voice as a leader in that space, and just the world of philanthropy and how all of that works. So grateful to her. And then, there are folks I'm sure that others on the line can identify with. Lynetta Gilbert, for me, was another great mentor. Judy Belk, Lauren Castile. Anytime I have an issue, I already know, if I haven't even talked to them in 6 months, I can pick up the phone and say, hey, this is what's going on. What do you think about this? Can you help me think through this and problem solve around this? So definitely just that cadre of leaders. And then I would say, my own CEO, LaJune. She celebrated 35 years at the Kellogg Foundation a couple of months ago, and just a wealth of knowledge. And she has continued to nurture my leadership development within the foundation and across the sector, to show up as that mentor, to show up as that sponsor as needed. But then, and she has modeled that for me as well. But then, there are just folks that they don't even know that they are your mentors, but you see them and you look at them and they just model the type of leadership that you want to have and be as a leader. And so it's tons of those folks. But I was going to go back to your grandmother, Miss Mickens, right? She was a model for me. She was unapologetically who she was and just stood in that every Sunday when she got up and shouted all across that church, right?
Yes.
So exactly. So, just people who, as you say, bring their full selves to it, and they are unapologetic about it. And so those are the folks that I'm drawn to. And then I'm drawn to people who are just authentic leaders, right? They understand and know and how to model bringing their authentic selves to the work.
Yeah, we're doing this book project about Black women from 10 regions around the country. And a couple of weeks ago, the women in Chicago had their book mixer. And one of the questions, and I attend when I can, but I don't participate. And since I got my sort of chops in Chicago, I actually sat down in the circle and participated in the conversation. And one of the questions is about, like, what would you tell your younger self? And listening to you say the names, the one of the Toastmasters woman, her name was Franny something. I cannot think of her last name.
From the South End neighborhood. Yes.
But one of the questions is, like, what would you what do you know now that you would tell your younger self? And my answer was to continue to follow Black women. Right. Right. Because we grew up in a community surrounded by Black women who were leading in a variety of different sort of spaces, whether that was, all my teachers were Black women from K through 6th, 7th grade, right?
Yeah.
The women who ran the operations of the church. The preacher might have been a man, but the folks behind the scenes getting it done and organizing and raising money and distributing resources, Black women. The leaders of majority of those neighborhood organizations were Black women.
Black women, that's right.
The folks leading our families were Black women.
Yep.
And so then I came to philanthropy, and I didn't bring that with me. Right. I took it for granted, didn't fully understand that the leadership demonstration that made me who I was at that moment was set by Black women. Even you, as you left New Spirit and went to the Community Foundation, you saw something in me to say, hey, I want you to succeed me in this role, right? So trusting that I could carry forward the work that you had started, the legacy that you had built. But it all began and continued up through, me leaving New Spirit and coming to Grand Victoria Foundation as a result of Black women. And when I got to philanthropy, I didn't, there were no Black women in Elgin in philanthropy. And it took me about 5 years to remind myself, right, of that safety net, the guardrails, the demonstration of leaders, of power, of vulnerability, of support, sort of grounded in Black women and the representation of Black women. And so you talking about that now, because you talk about my grandmother, but I think about your mother, who was, her demonstration, right, was completely different, but still authentic. I mean, original, I think, sort of model for self-care.
Yes.
And how you take care of yourself.
Yes, my mother really was. And I didn't really understand that as I have really started on this journey of radical self-care. I didn't understand that my mother was being just really, I don't want to call it selfish, but that's the only word that I can think of right now. Selfful in that space, So, and we would laugh about it with my mom going to bed at 7:30. Like that was her bedtime. period. You all get your homework done. Let me check it. But I'm in the bed at 7:30, right? She was an early riser, but she took care of herself. Breakfast was the most important meal in the morning. So we had breakfast every morning, no matter what, because that was important to herself, for herself. So just all of those things that she did to take care of herself as a woman, to decompress, to, not get in a tizzy about everything, to just ensure that she was taking care of her mental health. It took me a while to kind of get into a real discipline and a rhythm around that, and to understand the importance of that. And what does radical self-care look like for me to support and take care of both my mental and physical health? And that's definitely been a journey even before the pandemic that I've been on, and just, really being self-full in that space and creating some real boundaries around the many hats that I wear, and being okay with saying, nope, I can't do that. Nope, this is why. And sometimes I'm not going to give you a reason why. I'm just going to say nope, and let's
Nope
move
is
on and leave it alone. That's right. So just and feeling okay about that, and not feeling guilty about that. But, I wanted to just bring up, and we've talked about this before, but a point that Audre Lorde makes about Black women, and really as we work in these dominant cultures and these white spaces that really do not value us, it really pushes us to forge our personal power, right? And it's in that personal power that we really grow and learn about ourselves and who we are as leaders, and what we really can accomplish, and just being unapologetic about that as a Black woman leader. But it's through, I just heard your story. You were the only Black woman in Elgin in philanthropy, right? So you were an outsideness with that white dominant culture, and you had to forge your leadership style. You had to forge through what that would look like for you, and how you will show up at the table with vision, voice, and value, and being credible in that space, and just carving all of that out. And I can remember some of the conversations that we would have in relationship to the work and what you were experiencing during that time. But definitely that is a gift and a power that I think only Black women have, because it is the irritation of this work, and the irritation of those spaces that really help us to go deep and forge our power in this space.
Absolutely. And not only was I the only Black woman, I was surrounded by white people. So I came from East St. Louis, where everybody was Black and went to Lincoln or East Side or Pilgrim or Bateston. You know what I mean? Like it was a well connected community to this far away place where I didn't know anybody, and there were not a lot of people who looked like me. And there was a wide generational sort of span, in that I was often, for about 10 years, I was the youngest person in the room. And so, I had to figure out where I was going to go to feel safe, where I was going to go to feel connected. And as I said, it took me a minute to sort of be like, oh, I know what that looks like. I know what that looks like, and I know what that feels like, and the safety and the support, sort of being grounded in Black womanhood and Black woman sisterhood, right?
Yep. And I think, that is the space where I believe the networks are so powerful. And you talked about Chicago, and I just want to say this publicly. The Black women in Chicago have transcended around their leadership. And I think that, just my researcher self, it is so much to research and to know and to unpack and to understand in that space how they have created this network and this web of, I just call it like succession planning on steroids, right? In relationship to how they support each other to show up in these leadership spaces across the city. And it is just palpable to see how strategically they are doing that. And even though some folks that I talk to, and I'm like, how did that happen? Like, how did that really happen? And there's a real story behind that to unpack. So I just wanted to say kudos to all of those Black women leaders in Chicago and how you're creating that support system and that network. And that's something that you all could take on the road and take out to the sector and the field to really help people understand the power of solidarity and supporting one another and building strong networks.
Absolutely. Yeah, there is definitely a deep, rich legacy of sort of this leadership, right, pipeline in the Chicago region, and to sit at a table, break bread with them, sort of hear the stories as it has evolved, and just having my own, connection to the evolution of that over 20 years and watching, Sharon Bush, the president and CEO of Grand Victoria Foundation, was there. And, as their second CEO, she clearly has a strategy for the legacy of Black women's leadership at that institution. And it looks very different than it did when I was there. And she is intentional and purposeful in the ways in which she's not only seeding leadership there, but in the broader field through the Abundance Fund that she and Liz Dozer created together. That is really about how do funders support sustaining Black joy, not just Black leadership, right, and Black sort of institutional representation in the sector, but joy in the leadership demonstration and joy in the community that's being supported by Black-led organizations. And, it's one of those transformative ideas that perhaps, is as sort of transformative as you're saying, 20 years ago. Let's support the ability of folks in the system, right, the criminal justice system, to have a strategy that speaks to their experience, that speaks to their community, and resource them to invest in strategies that most resonate with that lived experience and those lived conditions and community, right?
Definitely.
That's what happens when we have a seat at the table and when you have the courage to say the thing out loud. Because you didn't have to say it. And Sharon didn't have to sort of lead and lean into that idea and that vision and put her institutional power behind it and to galvanize others to get behind it as well. So,
that's phenomenal. Yeah.
So I want to give folks in the chat an opportunity to ask any questions that they might have. Tina from the West Side, we're talking about Chicago. She says she's from the West Side. Tina, you have any questions, or any of the other folks? I know Tracy was there. We had all T's in the chat earlier tonight. But while we see if folks have any questions, I want to sort of ask you this question about what does it look like to nurture leadership, right? We've talked about what we experienced in the church and in community at, I think, such a critical time in my own and your development. Like, I didn't know I was being developed as a leader. I just, I was doing what my mama told me to do. And then doing what the church told me, then doing what you told me to do, right? To go to Spirit. But now we're more intentional, right? And have a clear sense of how to give back and reach alongside. So what does it look like for you to nurture the leadership of others?
Yeah. so many different ways on the spectrum. And I think number one, just like I said, showing up and modeling good leadership, right? And what that means in that space, because people need to be able to see Black women leaders just in action, right? And being able to glean and learn from that. So that's one. And so I'm always thinking about that modeling aspect. But, other ways is making myself accessible. And I think oftentimes, especially when you get to particular leadership roles, people think that you are inaccessible. People think that you are too busy. People think, so I have always tried to make myself accessible to folks, and especially to Black women, to break bread, to have the conversation, to, do whatever we're going to do after work, to connect. But whatever those things are, to make or pick up the phone when they call, whatever time that might be, but really to make myself accessible, share my personal number, share whatever, so folks will know that they have a support system, a listening ear, and that I am accessible in these places and spaces. So that's another piece for me. And then it is helping people to think through their leadership strategy, and that kind of work and conversations I really love to have with folks. I'm able to share just some of my experiences, work that I've done with an executive coach, and just some of those questions that my coach said to me that just made me stop in my tracks and really think deeply about my leadership and what that means for me in the present and going forward in the future. And so being able to just even, share some of those perspectives with other Black women in the field and in the sector is another way. And I always say to folks, I don't care if it's on a napkin, I don't care if it's in your phone, I don't care if you buy a template to fill out. Have a leadership strategy, a plan for yourself, that 1 year, that 3 year, that 5 year plan. And the reason I stress that is because if you don't have that plan in place, you can get lost in this sector. You can get lost in this field. You can get despondent. You can get mad. You can, curse somebody out and just walk out the door and say, I'm done. But having a plan around your leadership and what you really want to bring to the table and to the sector to shift a lot of what we experience as Black women can only happen if you write the vision and make it plain for yourself, and then really start to lean into that and live into that. And then the last thing that I do is, and I hope, folks that I've worked with over the years can attest to that. I work hard for Black folks and for Black women and others who are doing great work on the ground to get the resources that they need to continue to get that work done. And it's so funny because I have a colleague inside the organization, and he talks about a couple of things. Number one, he says, I don't understand how Alandra's initiatives always say they're phasing out, but they never phase out. They regenerate. They have a new spin on it, a new twist on it, or whatever. But it might close out, and that phase might close out. But believe me, it's going to be a 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever version of that work. And I always advocate for that work because I think it's so important, and it is continuing to deepen around our values as a foundation and around the things that we care about for children and families. And so I'm always looking for ways to get resources, to partner with others, to send folks out to other places for those resources. And then the last thing that I would say is an inside-outside strategy. What are those networks that you're building out there, those sustainable networks that's going to help you along your leadership journey?
Yeah. And can you talk about what are some of the networks that you are part, like there's formal and informal networks.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What are some examples of networks where you find the most value?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I hated that I missed the APFI leadership retreat, women's leadership retreat. Like that's always a highlight of my development. Like that's on my development list. I talk about that with my boss around that work. I've invited her and she came, right, to kind of come along and really see what this powerful network is really about. That whole women's leadership, Black women's leadership retreat that APFI holds each year, which is always on my husband's birthday. He always comes along with me. This year he was like, nope, we're doing something else. So I missed it this year, but just the real opportunity to continue to deepen those relationships, to rekindle old relationships, and to make new relationships. That is always such a powerful, transformative time for me. And what's really great for me is that the Kellogg's Foundation's fiscal year ends in August and new fiscal year starts in September. And that conference always happens at the end of August. And so for me, I use that as a vehicle for rejuvenation. I use that as a vehicle to prepare myself for the next fiscal year. I use that as a vehicle to just kind of wrap myself and clothe myself in strong, positive affirmation. And coming off of that retreat, I'm moving into the new fiscal year at the foundation, but I'm moving into it with a sense of energy and clarity and just positivity about myself as a Black woman leader, and being able to start off that new fiscal year with a freshness. And so that's always a great network for me. And then there's an internal network that I've established with some Black women in the foundation that we said we are now married. Mm-hmm. And for us, that means that we are married, that we will support, love, nurture, hold each other accountable, foster for the rest of our lives. And wow. So, and just being able to build that. And we've been working on that concept for about 3 or 4 years now. And I tell you, it has just yielded so much fruit in that space. And so I'm just super excited about that kind of sort of internal network with those Black women supporting each other and one another.
So the community organizer lives.
Always. Always.
So when you were talking earlier about the importance of having a plan, and I appreciate you sort of drilling it down, because when we think about a plan, right, for our leadership or for sort of how we're thinking about our future, it can sometimes be made to think that it's a complicated thing. You need a framework, you need a coach, you need a this, you need a that. And so when you said, well, I don't care, write it on a napkin, put it in the phone, whatever. And years ago, when I was, I want to say it's probably 11, 12 years ago, maybe longer. It was longer than that. It was longer than that. I'm right, I'm 49. It was probably 15, 16 years ago.
Those years fly by.
They go by so fast. But I was I along with 10 other people were the inaugural APFI Connecting Leaders Fellows. And about 2 years after our fellowship, it's a 1-year fellowship, and I think the applications come open for new fellows every spring. But we were 2 years out of our fellowship year, and Rasan Harris, who was a fellow in my class, at the time he worked at Atlantic Philanthropies, and he hosted the fellows to Atlantic had an office in operation in Bermuda. So for a couple years, he hosted us in Bermuda. And you mentioned Lynetta Gilbert earlier. Lynetta Gilbert sponsored, she provided me with a travel stipend. She was at so that I could go to Bermuda as part of this experience. And I, along with Rasan and Erica Seth Davies and Susan Taylor Batten and Phil Thomas, we were all fellows together, and we sat at a bar on the beach in Bermuda, and we literally mapped out on a napkin our plan to take over AppFee over several rounds of dark and stormies. And fast forward to today, right? So Susan became the next CEO of AppFee. She just, led the organization through the celebration of its 50th anniversary, a successful $25 million campaign. And so the power of dreaming and dreaming together with folks, that like, I don't even know, I can't even explain what we thought we were doing, but we just knew that a new demonstration of leadership, right, was needed and necessary. And
I have to make a confession, because, that work and that leadership program more specifically was in my portfolio for the entire time that I had a funding portfolio, right, supporting that work. But I have to make a confession, I would be so jealous and so mad, because those leadership fellowships, the cohorts would become so close-knit and so tight. I mean, you could just see it in how you all supported one another and how you showed up and what you did in those spaces to support each other. And I'm, I really want to join one of those fellowship programs, right? But I can't because I'm funding it. But you could just tell the strength of that program in developing leaders, but building strong networks and bonds across the cohort that I think probably will last folks for a lifetime in relationship to that work. And then the powerful example that you just gave around strategizing around what's the next level that we need to be taking this kind of work to, and putting it on that napkin and writing that vision, making it plain and working toward it. And now you see the fruits of that labor. But that's just a little personal confession there of jealousy that I would have about that network.
It is a very powerful network. And I would say, that wasn't the reason why I told the story, but thank you for lifting up. There are hundreds of fellows who have gone through that program, and folks have gone on to do amazing things. It really has been has and continues to be a significant launching pad for many folks in the sector. So for folks who want to understand or know where to go, I would say a fellowship experience can be a game changer. And as you said, the relationships that you build, and you just never know where it's going to, you can't even imagine
where it's going to take you. And I found something similar in the COF Career Pathways Fellowship that was really preparing leaders to move into those C-suite spaces within their foundations. And, at the time I was a director at the foundation doing that work. But that particular fellowship program for me, I have some, lifelong bonds with folks in that program that I know I will, just continue to have. But it also really prepared me for leadership and looking at ways that I bring my voice to the table in the philanthropic space, both in my foundation and then thinking about what that national platform looks like and feels like for me.
Well, it has been such a joy to wrap up this month of celebration every Wednesday for Black Philanthropy Month with you. If y'all haven't figured it out, Alandra and I have known each other for a very long time. Pre-baby, pre-husband, pre-divorce, all the things.
Pre-degree. Even pre-degree.
I knew it when she wasn't a doctor. Um,
everything, really.
um, when you were joining, before you joined, I was chatting with Channing, who is the sort of mastermind behind the scenes, making everything go according to plan. And I said to him, you know, we sang in the choir together. She used to pick me up in her maroon Nissan Stanza,
Sure would.
drive to
Remember
Philadelphia.
that.
And she was a soprano, I was an alto, and I don't know if we could, maybe we'll do a bar or two of "Oh Lord, How Excellent."
I love it.
And Channing said, well, you make sure you don't have all the parts, because you know you get to that part in the end where all of the members of the choir join in, from alto to tenor to soprano to
Yeah, but you know, you helped to kind of facilitate my marriage.
well, you've never said that before. We have gone way off script.
Yeah. But you know, it has been just a great journey. And I think the sisterhood of all of that, even though we are in different places and locations and spaces, we have remained connected in that space, and just continue to support each other. And you know, when you talk about those bonds and those networks and Black women coming together to support one another, I definitely find that in our kindred spirit and work that we do.
Absolutely. And we have to stay in good standing with one another, because we could have some tell-alls. We could have a tell-all to tell-all.
Yes, we can.
And every once in a while, y'all, I'll send her a picture of, you know, 25, 30 years ago, like, remember this?
I'm trying to figure out where you have found all of these pictures that are blackmail pictures, quite honestly.
For sure. I haven't figured out how to weave them into sort of the Voice Vision Value social media campaign, because I might be liable if I do. But I do have quite an arsenal. I do have quite an arsenal.
I see.
Yes. So, but thank you, my friend.
Welcome.
This has been lovely. And the last question of the night that I ask everybody is voice, vision, value. Which resonates with you and why?
I know you always ask that question, and you always push for one answer when all three of them are so important to me. But you know, I'm going to go with voice, and I'm going to choose voice because I am the youngest of 6 children. And for me, it was strategically figuring out how to use my voice so I could be heard, so I could get in the game, that people would know me and my identity and who I am outside of my brother and my sisters. And so for me, it is always being able to find ways to strategically lift up your voice to address those things that we know are important to shift in our community. So for me, it's voice.
Now, I will say, I don't know if you saw this, but my aunt Corliss is on with us tonight. And she is the youngest. She's my mother's youngest sister, youngest of 10. And I don't know if this is true for you, but as the youngest who's used their voice to get in the game, to always have a place at the table, have you now become the boss of your sisters and brothers? Like, because Corliss is the boss of everybody now in the family.
Yeah. They call me bossy, which is hilarious to me. But yeah, they call me bossy. They say you were so bossy. Yeah, I am with you all. Yep.
Okay, I was just curious because that is my boss, Antoinette Malveaux, is the youngest of 5, and the same thing. Same thing. She's now the leader of the family and her siblings. So the trend continues.
Yes. Well, thank you, Toya. It's been a pleasure. It's been a delight. And I am just, again, so appreciative of the space and the opportunity to have the conversation this evening.
Well, I appreciate you coming to have the conversation. There aren't many places where we can come and talk about, again, the fullness of who we are. in both the work and in life, but also in relationship to one another. So I appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and to be transparent and authentic, because that's a critically important demonstration for us to see in ourselves and in one another. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you
so much. And thank y'all for joining. We'll be back on regular schedule in September, the third Wednesday in September, for the Woman Crush Wednesday series. As always, it's a delight and pleasure to bring you these conversations with some of the brightest, brilliant, and beautiful Black women leading the field of philanthropy. So with that, we say good night. Take care of yourselves and one another.
Good night. Thank you.